Hello, everyone, and welcome to Police Off the Cuff Real Crime Stories. I'm your host, retired NYPD Sergeant Bill Cannon, a 27-year veteran of the NYPD. Folks, we have an amazing show tonight. And, the things that we're learning now, where we have Jessica Taylor and Valerie Mack, two of the escorts that somehow are now connected after almost 24 years, apparently to Rex Heuermann and the Gilgo Beach cases. Now, the complexity of these cases is really unbelievable. But because of science and technology and law enforcement, we've been able to piece these cases together. Well, not me, but outstanding investigators that have worked on these cases, scientists, something called investigative genetic genealogy, the advances in DNA, just the advances in overall investigation and the tools that investigators have that they've used in this case. After years and years, it seems that this case had been neglected early on, but they've made up for lost time by doing an incredible job. So I'm not going to waste any more time, but I just want you to know, hold on to your seats, hold on to your hats, your wigs, your toupee, whatever's loose, your wife, because you're about to enter true crime from a police perspective. You're about to enter the off-the-cuff zone, the police off-the-cuff zone. There has to be some common sense.
Yes, sir. They have the car stopped in 10th and Ranch Michael Byler.
We still don't know who pulled the trigger.
So the Gilgo Beach case, Rex Heuermann. For a long time, there was no arrest on this case. And now, since there has been an arrest, and that man in the bottom left of this little thumbnail, Rex Heuermann, an architect from New York City who lives in Massapequa Park, Long Island, they've been able to indict him so far for 4 of these murders. And what we're hearing is this Thursday, another indictment is coming down, and Rex Heuermann is going to be charged with a 5th murder in this Gilgo case. So before I keep talking, I have 2 unbelievable guests tonight. We actually have the retired NYPD Chief of Detectives I'd like to welcome to the show, Chief Robert Boyce. Chief, welcome.
It's good to be here. Thank you, Bill. Hello, everybody.
Well, Chief, you're looking good. You're looking, retirement suits you. And I know you're not totally retired, but you're looking good.
Thanks, Bill. I appreciate it.
And all the way from the left coast, or is it the west coast, we have retired FBI agent, Long Island boy from West Islip. Both his dad and his brother were NYPD sergeants. Welcome to the show, Bobby Chacon. Bobby, welcome.
Thanks, boss. Good to see you again.
It's really so good to see you. So I'm going to start with you, Chief. What do we expect this Thursday? What can we expect in the way of an indictment? And we're going to get into how did they get to this indictment. But first, what should we expect?
Well, they're going to arrest him for another murder, from what I understand. And it's just a question of who is it going to be, which one of the girls they found and which one they run with, what's going to happen, and which woman it's going to be. Because it's going to be someone, I believe it's Jessica Taylor. And if that does, that's complete. If that's true, and that's what the rumor is, if that's true, it's a complete flip on the other Gilgo 4, because this young lady was dismembered and put in 2 different spots. Her remains were found in Manorville in 2003. And then more of her remains were found by the Gilgo area in 2011. And only one other person has that with her is Valerie Mack. And they were missing before these other 4 ladies were missing. So this predates the Gilgo 4. So it's really, really interesting. And if they have enough evidence to charge on Jessica Taylor, you could look at the same thing. they're right around the corner for charging Valerie Mack. So exciting time. Kudos to the task force. They did a great job.
You know, we spoke the other night, Bobby, about modus operandi, signature, and when the defendant moves, staging. I'm forgetting the third thing. So modus operandi, signature, and staging. Now, none of us would expect this to be Rex Heuermann because of the MO, the severe change in modus operandi and signature. He doesn't cut bodies up and dump them in different places. And that goes to the third thing, staging. Would you speak upon that, Bobby?
Sure. I think what people should remember is that when a serial killer operates over a long period of years, they necessarily change their practices. Sometimes they do it to get better. Sometimes they do it because they almost got caught and they learn to change. So you can't in a short period of time, sure, all of their murders might look the same. But as those years get longer and longer and the period of time they're operating get longer and longer, you can expect to see some differences in the earlier victims and the much more recent victims. It's just an evolution of a way that they're killing and disposing of the victims. Sometimes it's because they've gotten better. Sometimes because their psychosexual fascination has changed a little bit. But oftentimes, the longer they operate, the more differences you'll see in some of their early kills and some of their later kills.
You know, Chief, that's fascinating, Bobby. One of the things I wanted to say, this goes back to 2000 with Valerie Mack, and then 2003 with Jessica Taylor. That should make us all fear that it didn't start in 2000. He was 36 years old in 2000. This could have started much, much earlier. So are there other bodies throughout Long Island, possibly throughout this country, tied to Rex Heuermann, serial killer, alleged serial killer?
Bill, it's a strong point. And one of the things that the Suffolk County DA said, they have him talking to hundreds of escorts, hundreds. We don't know where they are. That would take something. So you would think this happened before. Remember Karen Vergata went missing in 96, and her remains were found on Fire Island. In fact, she was called Fire Island Jane Doe for quite some time until they finally identified her. So we don't know the scope of this thing, to be honest with you. He's 57, I think, Heuermann. And so
I think he's 60. I think he's 60.
Is he 60?
Yeah.
Billy probably feels a lot older now. I can tell you that.
Yeah.
He's been in jail for a while. So it's we don't know the scope of this thing. And it seems his target time is the summer when his wife goes away, because Jessica Taylor went missing in July. So that month right there is where investigators are looking right now. You know, how many times his wife had left and he was home alone, which a lot of evidence points to that's where the murders happened, in Massapequa Park. Can't say it for sure, but that's where you could say this all happened here, each one. Wife sways by himself, and he puts the bodies in the trunk, and off he goes. So that's what I'm seeing right now. But we'll find out a lot more on Thursday. Really looking forward to hearing what they've done.
Absolutely. You know, one of the things about the bodies of Valerie Mack and Jessica Taylor, they said they appeared to be tied up almost like by a hunter. Their legs, you know, almost pushed up, their knees against their chest, tightly bound. Rex Heuermann, apparently, I don't know, he was a half-assed duck hunter. I don't know. But where did he learn these things? And is that, Bobby, part of his signature?
Well, I mean, certainly part of the signature at that time. It may have changed a little bit. You know, there is some differences in how some of these bodies, even the ones on Gilgo, were kind of disposed of or wrapped. And sometimes that's just a matter of opportunity. You know, he had burlap for a while and he was using burlap and then he changed to something else. You know, people shouldn't focus too much on that as, oh, it must be a different guy. It's just sometimes they act as whatever they have available to them and whatever opportunity presents itself. So I think that, you know, they did an extensive search of his house, and, you know, some of this material may become more important as they start learning, oh, this might be one attributable to him. We never were looking at, say, twine or whatever it may be, but now they're looking more closely at something they seized in the search. And what they do is when you do a search like that, you're overly broad in what you seize. You seize almost everything that could possibly, even if it's not indicated at the very time of the search, because later on you might learn something new in the investigation that points you towards another different type of piece of evidence that luckily you already retrieved from the home. So I'd be interested to see, when they release on Thursday the details of the new arrest, if it includes anything that was seized in the home and that led them to that particular murder.
That is incredible to me that the first search warrant, they were there for 12 days. Seemingly they ripped that place apart and they would have gotten every possible thing they could have gotten. Then they must have come up with something in Manor Haven that they needed to compare again to the crime scene in Massapequa Park. So they go there for another 6 days. Chief Boyce, what do you think about that?
You only have to believe that you have to go to court with a judge and show the judge what you have to get back into the house. All right. So they do a 9-day search, Manorville and North Sea, where Sandra Castillo went missing. She's the one that they Bittroff for. The third, she's not, the murderer is not charged yet. And that was John Bittroff, they think, did it. All right. But they searched North Sea as well, and all over Manorville. And I tell you, that's where the 2 girls were found. And so you go out in concentric circles. They had the dogs out there and the NYPD out there too, by the way, who were helping them out. What did they find to go before a judge to go back into that house? So it's A, B, C, and 6 days in the house. So 9 days out in the wild, searching all these places. A couple of weeks later, go into the house for 6 days, come out. 10 days later, he's indicted. Interesting sequence how that happened. So something must have happened, and don't know if it was a tip. What brought them to that location. We'll probably know more on Thursday.
I would have sworn if people had asked me years ago, of course, before the arrest of Rex Heuermann, I would have said this has to be 2 or 3 guys that committed these. Now I'm starting to believe, like many people are, this is all the work of one guy, of Rex Heuermann. Bobby, what your thoughts?
Well, yeah, look, the last serial killer case that I worked in the FBI, we arrested him in 2011, but he had killed people in upstate New York, Vermont, Washington State, all over the country, really. And we arrested him. He had killed a girl in Alaska. And that's the body that I recovered when I went up to Alaska. She was dismembered and stuff. So nothing really surprises me when it comes to the scope and the years these guys operate, especially when you get a guy and he's arrested, like the Golden State Killer, for example. When you arrest a guy in an advanced age, usually they did not start at an older age killing people, and especially if in my case, he was dismembering. Usually they've been at it for a long, long time. And it's hard to believe that somebody could be so evil to so many people for so long, but we've seen it again and again. And so, when I saw 10 or 11 bodies in Gilgo, and I grew up not far from there, I never.
You were a suspect too.
I was actually from West Babylon, which is from in this case. And so I always knew the possibility was that he had other bodies, other dumping grounds, in other places. I just figured that might be a possibility because at 60 or 55 or 60 years old, he's probably been doing this for 20 plus years. And that's a long time. And that's probably the opportunity to get a lot of bodies on him.
Chief Boyce, we spoke about modus operandi, signature, and staging. The staging part in these two, with Valerie Mack and Jessica Taylor, the fact that he did dismember them and then did dump them in other locations, is that done specifically to throw off the investigators, or is that done for some psychosexual crazy reason that he has in his mind?
Yeah, so he definitely went to hinder our identification of Jessica Taylor. I did a deep dive on her today because I thought that she was, she's the one that's going to bring charges on. Don't know if that's true, but that's what I'm guessing right now. She had a tattoo on her back. Now, he dismembered her head and her hands. I've had cases like that. Clearly, they're trying to hide out the identification from the police. But the perpetrator sliced the tattoo on her back. And that's how we identified her. Forensic, the ME was able to push it together and get a copy of that tattoo. And that's how I think a DC cop actually identified her from her arrest. had a heart and something like that on it. And so that's how, with most of my cases, unidentified bodies, tattoos help a lot in making the identification. So that was purposely done. The hands and the head, and also the tattoo, trying to remove it anyway. So yes, he was trying to hide the fact that who she was and where she came from. No one, and you can see why, because I think in Jessica's case, she was in the Bronx originally and then in Manhattan, which we know what Heuermann was. He was a Manhattan architect every day. Don't know if he met her there, if he is the perpetrator of the crime.
Interesting. Let me go. Andrew Cuomo had Jim Clemente on just last night, another FBI agent, probably the most knowledgeable about serial killers.
Let's bring in retired FBI profiler Jim Clemente. Investigated this case back in 2011. Good to see you, handsome. Once again, you can echo this. This was a big. This became part of the mythology of this part of the country, and now they seem to be solving these. What's your read on this attachment of another body and this big search, and what it could mean going forward?
Well, Chris, as you know, during the initial search, there was literally thousands of sources of forensic evidence from that home and from the beach and from the woods. So I think they're constantly thoroughly going through that. And when they get a match or when they get an indication that there may be more evidence, that's why they did the search warrant at the house again.
Jim, help me be fair about this. When you dig up a house the first time, like the way they did, then you go and dig it up again a second time. Is that unusual? What triggers that?
Well, it is unusual, but it could very well be that some of the forensic evidence that the medical examiner found, for example, it could be knife marks, it could be the marks from tool marks that were used to dismember these bodies. Sorry for being so graphic, but basically they could be going back to look for the tools that were used to make those marks. They can match them one to one.
Does it make sense to you as a profiler that Heuermann could be connected to Jessica Taylor and Valerie Mack, dismembered, both of them, bodies found in parts in different places? Both were sex workers like the Gilgo Four, even though the other bodies weren't necessarily seen to have been dismembered. Does this make sense to a profiler?
Yeah, well, dismemberment sometimes can be part of the MO and signature, but it could also be a practical move. In other words, at that point, he may not have been able to transport the whole body or to the place where he wanted to. In other words, he may have gone to a secondary location, let's say in the woods, but didn't want to, knowing that people also often get found in the woods, didn't want them to be identifiable. So then later, when he had the opportunity, he took those body parts to the other location where they were a little bit better concealed.
Now, you guys are very lucky at home that we got Jim Clemente on tonight, not just because he's good looking, but he knows the history of this case. And there's a very weird twist in this case that we told you about early on. But one of the reasons that there were no answers early on is that when the FBI wanted to get involved in this case and really take it on, the then police chief didn't want them involved. And the suggestion was because he thought they were looking at him. And he had some little dirty deeds of his own, allegedly, that he didn't want to come up. Now, Rex Heuermann's lawyer is saying, I'll tell you who killed Jessica and the other one, the chief. And he's saying to the FBI, let's look at him again. Do you think that's a ruse?
Well, I mean, obviously it is. I think, defense attorneys will do whatever they can to muddy the waters. But he's saying that the chief's antics may have let the real killer get away years ago. In fact, maybe that's true. But the real killer is Rex Heuermann. And all the evidence points to that, allegedly at this point. He hasn't been convicted yet. But all the evidence points to that. And for the defense attorney to try to reach that far, it really says that he realizes the case against Rex is pretty strong.
Do you believe there will be more bodies connected to this man?
He froze up at that point, but he says yes. So he says what we all say is that yes, and he feels that, Rex Heuermann has been doing this for many, many years. We spoke about this before, muddying the waters with Chief Burke. That's the only place that Robert Brown, the attorney for Rex Heuermann, has to go. What else is he going to do? They have tractor trailers full of evidence against Rex Heuermann. Bobby Chacon, your thoughts?
Well, Jim Clemente is a very good friend of mine. I probably talk to him almost every day. He got me my first job in television. Jim and I co-wrote my first episode of Criminal Minds that I ever wrote and aired. What he didn't mention in here, and I'm surprised, is that in 2011, Jim was asked by somebody, and I could get him, and you could have him on the show, boss, but he actually wrote a profile in this case in 2011. I think it might have been for CNN or somebody, because he was already retired by then. He actually, by the way, he retired after getting cancer from working at Ground Zero on 9/11. And so Jim wrote a profile in 2011 for somebody, and it was remarkably accurate when he calls that. When they arrested Heuermann, I talked to him and he showed me the profile, and it was amazingly accurate, some of the stuff that he had in there about the potential killer in 2011 that turned out to be true when Heuermann was ultimately arrested. But yeah, I mean, look, as it's a defense attorney's job. Nobody should get mad at them for doing that. That's their job. They're almost ethically bound to serve their client in the most aggressive way they can, and often that means throwing shade at the police or the prosecutor or whoever else they can. And it's distasteful to a lot of people. I realize that at times, but you have to understand that's their job. And so I fully expect them to come up with anything they can to try to mislead the jury and try to, like Jim said, muddy the waters.
Absolutely. Last year, we had Dr. Joni Johnston on the show. This is Rex Heuermann on the screen, but I just want to play a little bit. It shows a side of Rex Heuermann that is, when you know who he is, it's still distasteful.
Been working in Manhattan since 1987. I have one tool that's pretty much used in almost every job, and it's actually a cabinet maker's hammer.
A cabinet maker hammer. Okay.
It is persuasive enough when I need to persuade something.
Not someone.
Something. Sometimes I have to be the heavy framing hammer. Other times I'm the lightweight hammer just to nudge things along.
Dr. Joni, just taking a look at him, he could be, John Q. Citizen, normal, architect, works in Manhattan, lives in Massapequa, Long Island. But then we'll get into his personality and things that were found. I mean, that was a little creepy too, that hammer he was just talking about. I wonder if that will come up in any of these cases,
It is really difficult, isn't it, when we know kind of where things are now, not to look at that video and read kind of sinister things in there. But you're absolutely right. He's got a nice shirt. He's, in Manhattan. He's doing a business interview. If we didn't know the context, we would think, yeah, this is just a successful businessman who's doing an interview about his business.
And Dr. Joni, in the world of serial killers, and this is to put it very simply, there's organized offenders and there's disorganized offenders. And an organized offender is usually one owns a car, owns a house, is financially independent, is educated, is articulate, can travel around, just fits in with mainstream society. I think we would say that Rex Heuermann is an organized offender, but with signs of disorganization. Would you comment upon that?
It's interesting because the comments that we've gotten from his neighbors, and then looking, for example, the contrast between his home and the appearance of his home and in his business and how polished he looks in that, that picture, there is kind of a disconnect there, and so we do kind of think, yeah. And it's interesting, Bill, because you're right. The earliest classifications for serial killers was organized versus disorganized. And I think as the years have gone by, we've realized that most serial killers are organized to some extent, or they wouldn't be able to be a serial killer, right? So there's some degree of organization. And also that even the most organized serial killer, given the right circumstances with the opportunity that's there, may become disorganized in terms of grabbing a victim just because they can. So I think that distinction has become a little bit blurred, but I think it is useful because we can talk about somebody who's, for example, married, has a home, has a business, is not somebody who's going to be necessarily snatching people off the street or hitting them with a hammer in the subway.
But at the same time, he displayed some attributes and of a disorganized offender. And specifically, I'm going to point to something that occurred very recently. A woman made a police report against him. I believe it was just it was July 3rd in a park in Massapequa, where this large man popped out of the woods and started asking her like creepy questions. And she was so creeped out that she got away from him as quickly as she could, but she made a police report. That's how creeped out she was about this guy. And then when she saw he was arrested and she saw who it was, she was like, that's the guy who approached me in this park. So, Doc, my question to you is, but at the same time, he displayed some. All right, I'm going to get away from this now. So that whole thing with the hammer, Chief Boyce, that's pretty creepy, right? Maybe they'll find that hammer that he uses to get people to do what he wants to do, right?
Yeah, well, in that context, it wasn't, but now in this context, it is quite a bit. Because I think his father was a woodworker, and he picked up a lot of tools and he stayed with it. What's interesting about this individual was the split life that he had, and he was able to maintain. He had a Long Island life, he had a New York City life, and that's what he really did when he kept his whole persona away from his family. Because you look at his searches, I found that really interesting. This guy was a creep and a half. On all of his pursuits, there was a long list what he was looking at, all kinds of things, a lot of torture videos, all these things that would scare the hell out of you. And so that's what we're seeing now. And so we talk about organized, not organized. You have to know if you're going to do this. Someone can open up a door on you and just look into what you've been doing. And that's exactly what happened. He really wasn't that good with hiding his tech, his tradecraft, as if there is one for a serial killer. So that's all and these are the best cases, Bill, that I've seen, is the technology cases, the DNA cases, because you know what? It's unbiased. All right. It is, and it's accepted forensics, and it's human error free. So this case they have they have no cooperative, as far as I know, no eyeballs, nothing like that. But they have all this phone evidence. Thank you, FBI, for what you've done. Helped this case out. Should have happened a while ago, but it's here now. And bringing in other people onto your team that have other skill sets. Great job by them. But all that's against him right now. So we made a lot of mistakes, and they always do. And so now it's to find the mistake and turn it into compelling evidence, which is what happened.
Bobby, when we talk about organized and disorganized, specifically when I think of disorganized, I think of his house, because I spoke to one high-ranking police executive that was out there, and he said the house was so disgusting that the detectives could only stay in there for like 20, 25 minutes, and then they needed a break. It was filthy. It was like a hoarder's paradise, That is a sign of disorganization. And here's this man owns his own architecture company in the city, but yet his house looks like it's held up by a couple of 2x4s outside, or the roof would fall down.
Yeah, but that's what kind of thing the chief just alluded to, when they have two lives and they can be organized in one of those lives and disorganized in the other. He could be disorganized at the house he shares with his wife, put aside what kind of marriage it was. And then when he gets hyper focused on killing and he gets into his killing mode, the psychologists will tell you they can become so much more focused and so much more attentive to detail than they are in that other life, right? So when he gets that drive to kill, and that is a little different for each one of these killers, but they all, the ones that we've talked to, all describe this overwhelming drive, that thirst. Okay, tonight is the night, I'm going to go kill. Because he didn't kill every call girl that he paid to be with him. Obviously there's thousands probably over the years. So something triggers them to be in that kill mode, and so that's when they become hyper focused. That's when he can be attentive to detail. That's when he can be organized, because he has this panic of, I don't want to get caught. So, he can be disorganized in one life, and that other life he can be organized. So don't don't think of those as the same, because they're two separate lives he's living.
You know, I think like and I think you have a lot more experience with serial killers than I do. The only serial killer I remember in my entire police career was a guy named Aaron Key, who became known as the shopping cart killer. And he was killing, and he was a sex offender also in East Harlem. I think he did 4 or 5 murders. And that was the first case in New York State history that they linked cases by DNA together. It was 1997. That's relatively late, but that was the first case in New York State history. But I had never seen, most of our murders, and the chief will tell you this, was perp A shoots perp B. And then, witnesses, most of them are bad guy on bad guy murders. Chief, you want to comment on that, or you want to?
Well,
say
there
that's
is.
not true.
That actually is. I think we did my last numeric on that analytics was close to 80% of the victims of murder also had a criminal record and were also in some kind of criminal conduct. But there are others, the 20% who's not. And so those are the tough cases. And a lot of that is rage. Some of it is domestic. But these particular ones, and I've had, we've stopped them before they got that third body a lot of time. There was one in East New York, and Daniel St. Hubert, he stabbed a little boy to death on an elevator the night before, 2 nights before, I believe. We can't charge him on it because we don't have the evidence. He stabbed another woman to death. Just got out of jail from stabbing his mother. Why is this guy out? And then the little girl who was with the little boy survived to identify him. And we got him on a DNA. He wasn't like, we got him on DNA evidence. He dropped one of the knives that he brought, and that's how we picked him up. And he was a big guy. He was East New York, and I worked many years in East New York. And we got him because he didn't know about phones. That's how we tracked him down. He was on parole. So we stopped him before he got that third body. And so with the new forensics, the new technology, we can do that. This guy, he blew everybody off the charts. He was just a maniac. He stabbed 2 guys in jail. He was just a killer.
Yeah. We
finally took him down in South Ozone and locked him up. And then he went to try. A little girl pointed him out and screamed at him on the stand. She was great, and he's convicted. So you stop a lot now because law enforcement's got so much better. You see what we have now. You commit a crime in Manhattan, you're out of your mind because we're going to get it on video at some point of it. Just about every time. These detectives know what to do. So that's the good news when you have someone like this. But the psychosexual ones, they're the ones that keep me up at night thinking about this. Someone like this guy, with the crazy searches and all these things. What's driving him? How many more are out there? And how many more people have this guy killed? If Heuermann's our guy, and he's not convicted yet, but how many more victims are out there laying in the woods someplace?
Absolutely. Let me just take folks, this is Police Off the Cuff, real crime stories. If you like real crime, true crime from a police perspective, then you're in the right place. And if you're not subscribed to us, go on our YouTube, hit that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, hit the like button, share us with your friends, your family, even family members you don't like, share us with them. And if you want to contribute to us, we have a Patreon with 4 different levels. We also have a YouTube channel membership with 5 different levels, and you can contribute to us. Monica Lynn from the chat, I want to thank you. She just gifted 10 Police Off the Cuff memberships to 10 lucky individuals. Monica, thank you so much. We really appreciate all of our fans, our subscribers, and our friends to Police Off the Cuff, which is growing all the time. And we have great guests on, like we have tonight, retired Chief of Detectives of the NYPD, Chief Robert Boyce, and of course, former Long Island boy, Hofstra University law grad, West Islip, born and bred, and dad and his brother, both NYPD sergeants. Man, I can't think of any more attributes, but Bobby Chacon. So I want to just, while I have you guys here, just thank you so much for coming on the show. You bring so much expertise to this topic. And I want to play this little video here because I think it touches upon what we're probably going to be dealing with this Thursday in regards to who and what Rex Heuermann is going to get charged with in an additional case.
His head and hands were cut off when she was found in Manorville 20 years ago. Investigators finding them on Ocean Parkway in 2011. She was an escort working in New York City, reported missing out of Washington, D.C. She was identified by a tattoo the killer failed to fully scrape off her hip.
Serial killers whose motives are sexual have a fair number of commonalities. One is the desire to inflict pain and suffering.
Jessica Taylor and Valerie Mack, another dismembered victim found in Manorville, were tied to the Gilgo Beach serial killer or killers. 2 law enforcement sources told me they were tied up in a very cruel way. One saying their leg area was bound in a ball. You'd have to be a hunter to do something like that. The second source said the knees were brought into their chest area. We talked to the second source about 2 men who have been discussed in connection to the Mack Taylor murders. Convicted killer John Bitroff, a carpenter who lived in Manorville and went to prison in 2017 for killing 2 sex workers in the early 90s. And Rex Heuermann, the Midtown architect who allegedly picked up some of his escorts in Manhattan before murdering them. He is charged in connection with the Gilgo 4, whose bodies were intact and bound in burlap. One source said of Bitroff and the Manorville bodies, "We're looking at him very closely, but we're not ruling out Heuermann." The Suffolk County District Attorney, though, is not commenting on law enforcement theories about the Gilgo others. We met him in Massapequa Park when the search of Rex Heuermann's home was finished up on Tuesday after 12 days.
Our investigation, focused on the Gilgo 4. We're going to continue to investigate that case, prepare that case for trial, and we have our investigation now has become public, obviously, and also it's broadened. So we're going to look at the other instances where bodies were recovered in that area as well.
The DA said lab experts will now look for trace DNA, blood, and hair fibers in the massive amounts of evidence taken out of Rex Heuermann's house in Massapequa Park. That could take quite some time. The DA pointing out this week, it's not like live TV.
So, again, that Mary Murphy, by the way, did an outstanding job on this case. I think she'd been covering it for a long time, and she really did an excellent job. She really, I don't know, I think she worked with Mike Sheehan, who was a former Manhattan North homicide detective, and I think he may have schooled her, and I think she was also married to an NYPD detective. So she seemed to really understand this case more than a lot of other reporters did, and her work, just from my observations, her work on this case was outstanding. So that's the report that we spoke about earlier. Valerie Mack and Jessica Taylor were tied up as if by a hunter and a chief. You alluded to the fact that he scraped off a tattoo, and it turns out the tattoo was on her hip. Mm-hmm. And because he was trying to thwart the investigation, stop from being identified. Bobby Chacon, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, we refer to those as forensic countermeasures, and that's a knowledge of police tactics and procedures that are very commonly known now, thanks to shows like CSI and in Criminal Minds and things like that, and Forensic Files. And so, yeah, these are forensic countermeasures that are commonly seen. I mean, look, I worked the mob in Queens. I worked the Lucchese family, and the hallmark of them was chopping off the hands, or at least the fingers and the head, to get rid of the fingerprints and the dental records, right? So people know the hands and the head are the identifiable features, right? So when you see something like that taken, it usually is a forensic countermeasure. It usually is somebody that knows something about police procedure, and you don't have to be a former cop to do that. Most people that watch TV know that now, and so as soon as you see that, you realize that this person is very aware that the police may be looking at them, or is very aware that they don't want to get caught. And beyond that, I hate to say it, but simply to cut someone's head off. If a murder happens, as a crime of passion between 2 people or whatever, and it's an in the moment thing, that's one thing. But to sit there and actually saw somebody's head off, it takes an extra level of type of person to be able to do that. And usually, if they're doing that, it's not their very first time they've killed somebody. And so that's kind of one of the things you think about, like, who could be this brutal to literally sit there and saw someone's head off? It's not normal.
No, absolutely not. Bobby, when you were telling those Lucchese crime family stories, I was like thinking, they cut off his hands. He took too much. They took out his eyes. He saw too much. they cut his ears off. He heard too much. These guys were rocket scientists, the way they did things. But no, I mean, you're absolutely 100% correct. I mean, think of the how crazy, really mentally disturbed you have to be to do something like that. And I remember we had a case in the I think it was in the 2-3 squad where a woman we found the body in a body bag. It was in a suitcase. Someone kicked it out of a livery cab up in Harlem. So when we opened it up, we were like, nah, we're not going to open this all the way up. There's something bad in here, So they brought it down to the ME's office, and it was a female torso with no head. The head was gone. And luckily, in her pocket, she had a phone number with a name on it. And that was basically how we cracked the case. It turned out it was her husband that killed her because she was pregnant from someone else, which we found out from the autopsy that she was pregnant. But like you said, he sawed off her head with a hacksaw, and there were parts where they said there was stopping and starting. He got tired, took a break, and he didn't put the saw in the exact place it was before. I mean, I don't want to be so graphic, but these are the things that we deal with as police. Chief, I can see you even getting a little upset there.
We've seen these things before. They're not easy to watch. And you walk in, I always wonder if that PTSD is going to come back to me. And so far it hasn't, thank God. But we remember these. You remember the Roy DeMeo crew out of the Gemini Lounge, some mobsters. Bobby, you alluded to that, how brutal they were. And it was just a murder machine. That's what they were. They were killing people left and right. And that was part of what they did, the Westies and others. Something a little different. I had a case in the Bronx. I have to tell these stories too much, but a guy completely out of his mind killed his mother, cut her head off, and was taking selfies with it. That's how bad it was. That was in the Adams houses in the South Bronx. So it's something, it's just insane when you see it. It's gore. And Bobby, you're 100% right. What level do you have to get to be able to do that? Once you kill another human being, and you can do that, even more so, in this case to his mother. So you see these things, and it's a bad side of humanity, or inhumanity for that matter, that we're exposed to. And we've seen time and time again. And it going back to Valerie and Jessica, it's a curveball is the way I look at it. And really, I can wait till Thursday, but I'm really interested in what happens Thursday.
Chief, another thing that is amazing is that how long DNA and forensic evidence can last. Unbelievable. Like, think of the elements. If they did recover some things out in Manorville just recently, think of the elements it was exposed to in 24 years, 21 years. And is it possible that some forensic evidence still existed in the woods in Manorville? Bobby, you're shaking your head yes.
Yeah, I mean, I worked forensics for 19 years. Now I ran the FBI dive team, so most of our forensics was underwater, and people were always amazed at the amount of DNA we could still take off something when we got out of the water. Bodies, of course, but weapons and other things that were under the water for long periods of time. Of course, it changes. The temperature of the water matters. The salinity of the water matters. The movement of the water matters. So there's a lot of factors, but we were surprisingly successful in getting DNA off things that have been in the water a long time.
That's incredible. Chief, what do you think about them having collected potentially DNA from victims inside Rex Heuermann's home after all those years?
Well, we've seen the hairs, and it's a mitochondrial case, by the way. It's not a nuclear DNA, which is really interesting. But here's the issue: years ago, I had a big case in Queens where we used an outside lab to help us with the DNA analysis, and we were looking for a profile. Of course, we had the profile, and we were looking for something more on the profile. You can tell us about his parents and things like that. Now it's commonplace. Suffolk County, to their credit, is using it. I believe the lab's out now in California right now, so they're sending their stuff immediately, and you can do it very quickly as well. Get that profile, send it out, and get analysis. Remember, Bill, we're 10 days away. It was just 10 days ago when they did the house. Now they're going to hopefully unseal indictment Thursday to tell us who the victim is. So that's a short period to what used to happen a couple of years ago. It used to take a month or two to get anything, a profile up. But we're moving forward. We're in a whole new generation of forensic science right now. It's really exciting. When you have these cases, what I said before, we're going to catch these guys before they become serial murderers, hopefully, or have a bad body count. That's the upside.
Absolutely. I think, Chief, you may have been referring to this famous lab named Othram, Othram. I think they're in Texas, but they've been doing a lot of work with investigative genetic genealogy with the FBI in building family trees and identifying, cases some 30, 35, 40 years ago. And this technology is just incredible. And I think the fear is that the science is here, but has the law caught up to the science yet? And that's the scary thing, because as you know, Chief, law enforcement agencies have been very reluctant to use familial DNA.
Well, not us. If you remember the murder of Karina Vetrano in Queens, Phil Vetrano, her dad, went on and testified, and we were able to get familial DNA testing done. And then they put a hold on it. Now it's back again. So why wouldn't we do that? We just solved the crime. We found a body in the water. We had a tattoo. We're almost there, but we still couldn't figure out who it was. We were able to identify her, through strong isotope technology. You name it, we'll go to any length. And as you go along in your career, detectives are amazing. They pick this stuff up. And that's why it's so important to have a team. Some of the best cases we did was with the FBI and the DEA. You bring in these partnerships because everybody has a skill set, and you want to tap into that. Look at the New York State troopers who went into that lawman search to find that avalanche. Important stuff. Bring it in. Let's all get on board. Let's get this done.
Well, I'm amazed at some of the other technology that really wasn't where it. Well, I'm off the job 13 years now. And specifically cell phones. It is incredible what they are doing with cell phones now, and specifically that technology called geofencing, which is just incredible. And I don't know if you guys followed the case in Oklahoma where the Kansas moms went and they were set up by 5 people over a custody dispute, and they murdered them, and then they brought them to a ditch and they dug like a 15-foot hole with a backhoe and everything, and they buried inside a chest freezer. And they found it because of cell phones. The burner phones that this woman, the woman Tiffany Adams, who was the grandmother of the children in question, she killed these moms with 4 other people, and they tracked it right to this location where they were buried with burner phones. And there they see, there's the fresh, ground that was dug up. That's where they dug, and they found the bodies and other evidence inside. So I'm amazed, and specifically geofencing. Bobby, can you describe geofencing to our audience?
Well, I mean, I tell you, I'm not an expert in phones, because like when I came on the job, we didn't even have phones, right? We all share. We were in the squad area. We had one phone for 4 desks. But I will tell you this, as odd as this may sound, at 30 years in law enforcement and my law degree, I was put on a jury last year in a murder in the first degree case here in California, murder with special circumstances. And it was a 5-month trial. And we had a ton of cell phone testimony, both from the phone companies. We had an FBI agent testify. I'm sitting in the jury box, and I can say pretty confidently, but for the cell phone evidence, we probably wouldn't have convicted, because there was no connection between the guy we were trying and the other 4 people in the conspiracy, other than his movements, not even some of the text, but they actually tracked his movements on certain days and the movements of the other people, and then texts on where they were. And boy, it was damning when you looked at, and the prosecutor did a great job at with these moving graphics about where they were. So geofencing, I think, is similar to if you map, that's why they call it a fence. So you draw lines on a map, and you can confine somebody into a certain geographic area at a certain point in time. That's like surveillance. That's like having a surveillance plane up and saying he was here at this point, he was here at that point. I mean, if you remember, I think it was the Alex Murdaugh case in South Carolina, where they literally had him in his house pacing, and they said he was on the phone for some 20 or 30-minute phone call, and they could tell he was pacing back and forth in his house, and they said, oh, he must have been nervous about this phone call. It was right after his wife and son were found murdered. And so they literally tracked him in his own home on where he was in the house based on his cell phone pinging and stuff. Now, I didn't realize they could do that. I thought like once you had like you were hitting off a cell tower or pinging off would give you a general area, but they can get much, much more specific now. I don't know how they do it. It's I did sit through a lot of this testimony. A lot of it's scientific, and you remember it for the purpose. Like when I was on the jury, we remembered it, but it's pretty technical, and that's why we had a 5-month trial, because sometimes we had days and days of testimony about how these cell towers work and how these phones work and the information they give off. But I mean, yeah, it's pretty damning. It's interesting.
It's powerful evidence. It's very powerful evidence. And Chief, it comes into play in this case, the burner phones. How about the fact that they have calls going into the Gilgo 4, their phones from Rex Heuermann's phone?
Exactly right, Bill. And look where he's hanging his phone, next to the other phone, his real phone, his work phone. So now you triangulate that, and you follow him around, and all of a sudden you figured out that he's carrying them on both hips. You see some guys do; they have their cell phone and private phone. It's not unusual, but he had burner phones for that. Go find out, do his credit cards, where he's buying it, he's paying cash. Follow him. You saw the store that he went to, and you go back. We couldn't get from. I don't think we were able to get Maureen Brainard Barnes' phone. It was an 07. They didn't have the technology to go back, get that back. That's the only case out of these 4 girls where they couldn't get the burner phone, from what I understand. They had other evidence on that, obviously, but Melissa, Megan, and Amber, yes, they did. He had the burner phone for that. And he was running his life off those burner phones too. He had a bunch of different email addresses where the real sick stuff in that as well. I will tell you, I work for a news corporation, right? I work for ABC News, and I'm asked to discuss these cases all the time with phones. There was a guy in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, PhD, killed his girlfriend, same as you were talking about before, Bobby. She was pregnant and he was married, so he killed her. And they had his phone next to hers. They went right to that location and found the body once the phone went dead. So it's important. A lot of hardcore criminals know that, but not the ones who are this crazy where they do it. They make mistakes, and the phone is where you catch them each time. To this day, it's not as easy as it was a while ago, but we still use this. It's still important, and it's all how it's presented in court. It's like a symphony. And you're orchestrating all these things. You show that to a jury, and it really takes everything off. They say it's circumstantial. It's not. It's compelling evidence. It's overwhelming in many spaces.
It also, for us as a juror, it was something the defense couldn't attack as bias. You couldn't say the data was biased. You couldn't say the data was skewed. You couldn't say the police made up the data. The data is just so hard and fast. It's there. The defense really had a hard time combating that, so they wanted to direct our attention elsewhere. But that's such hard data that you can't say, oh, it's bias, or it's just there and it's factual, and it's like it's something that the jury knows it can rely on.
It really is. I mean, it's something that's here. It's going to stay here for a long time. None of us can get by without our phones. Let's put it that. So you carry it everywhere. You couple that with DNA. You couple that with some closed circuit TV. All these things are our friends. Tattoos are our friends, by the way, too. And law enforcement, that's how you solve crime. So today's investigators, I love the old guys. I love the way they acted, but they were really had to strategize everything. These new investigators are really something.
I don't know that I could go back and do it. I did posse cases in Brooklyn, the 6777, and Willie Bishop and Bobby Powell taught me more about conducting homicide, Brooklyn House South homicide than I ever learned anywhere. And but it was still the old school way of doing things. It was getting out in the street and talking to people, developing sources, and somebody knows something, and then talking. And it was great. But I'd be fearful if they threw me back out there now, and I had to learn some of this stuff on work and living off my laptop or my phone as an investigative tool, because it's been a long time.
But
Bobby, it's funny you should say that, because it's back then, if you put him in the box and you couldn't hold him, you thought you really hurt your case. Nowadays, you got his story. He tells you where it is, and now you take his phone and you tie it to that story. And
right.
That's how you get him in.
You lock him in, and then if the phone tells a different story, now you know he's lying.
Now you know he's your person. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Bobby, what you were talking about, the old school way, still a lot of those techniques, and I always found in the squads is that talking to people was the key to almost everything. And now with all the scientific tools you have, you bring that technique and that talent with all the technology. And look, there was always a couple of geeks in the squad that were the phone guys. There was a couple of guys that were great at the computer. Not everyone could have talent in every area, right? But you use the guys that had the talent with the cell phones. You use the guys that were great computer guys, and then you use the guys that were great interviewers and interrogators. And with that, it's a powerful weapon, and you're going to defeat any criminal for sure.
Yeah, I mean, when I look at a case like this, that's the first thing I want to do. It's like they say, what would you do? I said, I just want to be in that room and talk to you. I mean, that's how I'd solve this case. I would talk to Rex, and you give me 5, 6, 7, 8 hours with him, and by the time we're done, that's the way I would, and hopefully solve it. Now people say, oh, he'll never crack and stuff. But I got a guy once admit 10 murders to me that he did. He probably did twice that. We sentenced him for 10 in Brooklyn South, and he admitted. And we did not have enough evidence to charge him with any of those until he went into WITSEC eventually. He was on Rikers when we found him on another charge, on a state murder charge. But Willie and Bobby and Jack Winane in the 7-7, in the 6-7, and Mike Paul in the 7-7. I mean, these guys, we rallied, and it's just the way we did it. And again, he pled to 10 homicides that. I probably shouldn't. If he sees this, he'll be, but he did 10 years in jail and he's out now, but he's in WITSEC. But yeah, that's the way we did it. We got people in the room, but we went in armed with whatever we knew. Now you're going into that interview with a lot more evidence, a lot more stuff, because of the data and the technology that can arm you with things when you go into that room that he doesn't know, And that's would be so valuable to somebody like me who just relied on my interrogation skills learned from those second and first grade detectives that I work with. And that was the game then. Now it's a different game.
Yeah, absolutely. What a lot of people are interested in is that we know they took tons of evidence out of storage lockers, out of the home. What do you think the chances are that, well, I know what my answer would be. What do you guys think the chances are that he took souvenirs or trophies and kept them in his house? Chief, what do you think?
It's interesting because it has happened. We've seen it time and time again. I don't know because this the case discipline that they've had on this so far is really a tip of the cap. You remember the Idaho State murders, the same thing. They kept their discipline. They didn't, no leaks to the press. Nobody heard nothing until you see the trial, which is what Ray Tiener's doing now. Thursday's going to be his thing. So we don't know until the trial. And of course, he'll give it to his defense attorney, talking about before. He'll come up with an alternate theory, of course, probably be Jimmy Burke. But so you really don't know if he did that. And Bobby would know this more than I do. Does everybody keep souvenirs? Some do. Who was the guy in who the troopers pulled over on the Southern State?
Yeah.
He kept a lot of things. And a lot of them were East New York girls.
Joel Rifkin?
Joel Rifkin, yeah.
Rifkin did that.
Yeah.
And they went back and got a treasure trove of personal items from the girls that he had murdered. And then he gave everything up. Once confronted with that, and he listened, bud.
Well, he had one in the back of his pickup truck when they pulled him over, didn't he? Didn't he have
They did. State troopers, pulled him over for a hanging license plate. And then I think they actually smelled the decomposition when they walked up. Opened it up, and there was the body he killed. But he was an interesting guy in that he would pick him up in New York City, he would kill them in Suffolk County where he lived, and then he would deposit the body elsewhere in Suffolk County. So bang, bang, bang. We've seen this before with Robert Schulman, if you remember him, the postal worker from Hicksville. Same exact thing. 3 different jurisdictions he was doing it in. And of course, Suffolk County at the time caught that one, and they had to figure out and then we found out the stroll, where she was working, this escort at the time, and then we went back and talked over there. That helped them solve the case.
That's also forensic countermeasure, right? They know it's different jurisdictions. The girl's going to go missing. The missing persons report's going to be in New York City. Any physical evidence might be deposited at the murder site in Nassau County, but she's just caught in Suffolk. She's discovered in Suffolk County. And now you've got 3 different jurisdictions, and we're much better at. Everybody's much better at talking and communicating to these days, but that's still a way that they can kind of slow down an investigation. If they go missing one place and they get found another place and it's different jurisdictions, they just count on that kind of slowing things down.
A lot of people want to know about why was Asa Ellerup, Rex Heuermann's wife, cleared so quickly? Why did they just said we're not charging her, she's not involved? I mean, many people think that she had to have known something. She was living with this lunatic, this alleged serial killer that there's a ton of evidence against. Is it impossible that she didn't know what he was doing? And I mean, then of course it was muddied up with John Ray, who says that she was a swinger with her husband, which I mean, I didn't buy that story, but so what do you think the chances of that? Bobby, do you think that she didn't know about what he was doing?
I think it's possible. I mean, people that are dead on saying she must have known something. I don't think so. I mean, she might have. I could be wrong, but I don't think it's 100% that she must have known something. Every marriage is different. I've learned this in dealing with investigations. Every marriage is different. People share different things. My feeling is she probably knew he was a serial, visitor of call girls and hookers and prostitutes. I think she probably most likely knew that he had that compulsion, and he probably watched a lot of weird porn that she just closed her eyes to or looked the other way at. But I think it's possible that she had no idea that he was out murdering these girls. I don't know. Again, I could be wrong, but I certainly think it's possible. The last serial killer I worked, Israel Keys, he was living in Alaska. He was living with his girlfriend, who was a nurse anesthetist. She made really good money. She worked in a local hospital, and she had a nervous breakdown when she realized she was basically sharing a house with a serial killer. And they were together a couple of years, and I know he had done at least 4 or 5 homicides while they lived together, while she was sharing a bed with him. And he had custody of his 11-year-old daughter from a previous marriage in the home. And so, I know for a fact she had no idea that she was sleeping next to a monster. So it is possible. And again, this seemed like a marriage that wasn't the most conventional. I think they spent a lot of time apart from each other. She probably knew he probably had some habits that, she kind of tolerated and looked the other way. But I think it's possible that she didn't know. Again, it's possible she did, but I'm not in the camp where she must have known.
Billy, you look at the timeline. We all do timelines of these things. And her timeline was she was away when the girls went missing. And that seems to be his MO. She would go away and she traveled to relatives. I believe she was born in she's overseas somewhere. She would go and I forget
Iceland. I think it was Iceland.
There you go. And it's and so whenever she went, the girls went missing. So I think it's certainly possible. And if she's born in a different culture than us, she may not have picked up on that. So they gave her, they cleared her almost immediately. I think those timelines, that's why it's so interesting to me. Jessica went missing in July. I'd like to know more about that. Where was she that July in 2003? I think it's important to look at. If we can go back that far, and you could pick up anything. Go and look at the the passports and stuff like that. Ask her. She has an attorney. And she's from what I understand, she's got a contract with someone too on this thing. So when I saw that, they excused her. Remember, one of her hairs was on something in the case.
It was on the burlap that was around one of the girls.
That tells me the murders happened in Massapequa Park, where she was. That's why. Anyway, I remember when they were in front of that thing for so many days initially. Well, that's the murder spot right there, because you really can't take it. There's motels nearby, but why would you risk that when you have an empty house? So I'm looking at that separate life, weird kind of like psychosexual type of activity, kept it apart from his regular life with his wife and kids. And they were in shock too. They didn't realize.
So Chief, are you saying that the murders were committed inside his house?
My best guess, okay, because they weren't home then. So if you're a killer like that, and if you go and risk it someplace else and go through torture, if he did do that, you need a quiet place with nobody around. And that's what his house offered. And that's what I believe they were there all that time. I didn't believe he was buried. I saw them digging up. I didn't think he did that. It's like, I forget the name of the killer. John Wayne Gacy did that years ago. I didn't think he was doing that. But where else? Then tell me where else. And possibly the storage center, but even that's more risky than happening in the home. She wasn't home. and that's where it happened. That's my belief.
I mean, it's the perfect spot if you think about it. He had time, he had room, he had, he could take his time in prepping them for disposal. I mean, he could do a lot of different things. He knows when his wife's coming back. He had time to clean up, before she came back, although it doesn't sound like a lot of cleaning went on in that house. But, it's the perfect place for him to do it. He knows that. He knows the house. He feels comfortable there. It's private. No one's around. He can take his time. It does seem like, and a motel doesn't afford you that. Other venues don't afford you that. So, I mean, it certainly seems like a very likely place that he would feel comfortable in doing that.
Gigi from the chat, she wants someone to explain that Asa Ellerup's hair was on the duct tape that was wrapped around one of the victims. You want to explain that, Bobby?
Yeah, sure. If anybody that has a roll of duct tape in their house or in their garage, it's usually pretty thick, the duct tape roll, right? Where the thing, pick it up, go look at it. Invariably, there's stuff stuck to the side because the tackiness, the material that makes that tape tacky, it leaks out on the sides a little bit. If you feel the side of a roll of duct tape, it feels a little tacky, which means that anything that touches it sticks to it. So it's almost like something that you would just, you ever see people with a piece of tape and they blot it on something to pick up little things. That's the way both sides of a roll of duct tape get. Invariably, if your duct tape has been in your garage any length of time, it's got all kinds of crap stuck to the sides of it. And I think that's probably what happened. Some of her DNA, some of her hair, whatever else, got stuck to the sides of this thing. When he goes to rip it off, it just stays on there. And when he uses it, her hair, and remember, these are like microscopic little things. They're so good at finding this stuff. The lab guys are so good at finding this stuff that it wouldn't have to be something so obvious, but he probably never saw that thin strand of hair. But when they get in the lab and they're examining this stuff, boy, they find that stuff. And so I think that's the kind of thing. It was probably stuck. She may have used that roll of tape for something or handled it or something, and it just transferred there, and it kind of stuck because that tackiness of the outside of duct tape is very common.
Well, Bobby, you used the term transfer, and it's transfer evidence. And like when you live in a house with numerous people, people lose, I think, 50 something hairs off their head every time you're moving around. And maybe not you, Chief. I know, I'm just kidding. but we all lose hair off our head just every, and that's being left somewhere. So a lot of people made a big deal that, well, how come Asa Ellerup's hair was found, but the children's hair was never found? Explain that one, Chief.
Well, no, it's just a happenstance. Who's doing all the work in the house is Asa Ellerup, and Bobby couldn't explain it better. Everybody has it's an inexpensive tape for the most part, duct tape, and it does pick up anything you put down on. It's just and if you're using that, another argument that it happened in the house, that he used something there that's nearby to tie these ladies up. So it's another argument you would make there as well. And everybody, those transference of anything, you open the door and you can hurt forensic slate and prints and whatever. You have to be very careful. But in the same vein, you capture that, you bring it to the lab, and all of a sudden you're looking at it. You remember they had that, and they went and got the bottles out front in the garbage and found out that it was a female's DNA, and that's where they made the connection on that too. Someone in that house is that DNA that was on the top of the bottles. So this is all a forensic case that well put together. That's going to help out. And again, you lose skin cells left and right as well. Everything's full. A lot of things fall off me, but it's one of those things that a good forensic science team can go in there and recover evidence.
I think people, what they like the best about this case is the pizza. Everyone always mentions the pizza. Oh, they took the pizza box and they got Rex Heuermann's DNA off the pizza. I guess he left the crust. You didn't think a fat guy like that would leave the crust and eat it all, but luckily he left the crust, so they were able to get his DNA off it,
Well, that's where you start abandonment DNA, and then when he's arrested, you go get the buccal swab, and now you have the same thing, and then now you're in business, which is what happened. It's abandonment DNA. A lot of cases, we train our detectives to pick up on those things. I won't go into why we do it, how we do it, but that's one of the things as well, that abandonment DNA that really put him in a hard way to go after that.
I think the Golden State Killer, same thing. I think they got it off a Coke can, or they followed him around until he discarded a Coke can or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, look, or else we get it what we call surreptitiously, right? That's the word everyone loves. We collected the DA in a surreptitious manner. I love that word, you know, and so does the people watching this. Let me just play one last little clip here.
Gilgo Beach Murders investigation. Rex Heuermann, the man charged in the deaths of 4 women killed more than a decade ago, could be charged in the death of a 5th victim. This was Greg Circle is live in Hauppauge with the new details for us. Greg.
And Chuck, we're here outside the office of the Suffolk DA, who, even after the arrest of Rex Heuermann last year, vowed to continue investigating all 10 of the Gilgo cases. And tonight, it appears another aspect of the murder investigation is about to bear fruit.
A court proceeding has been scheduled on Thursday in the Gilgo case.
Today, Suffolk's DA wouldn't say much more than that. But 2 sources with knowledge of the DA investigation tell News 4 that on this Thursday, accused serial killer Rex Heuermann will be charged with a 5th Gilgo murder.
We'll be back on Thursday, and once that court proceeding unfurls, we'll have more comment.
This apparent new murder charge comes after April's police search of wooded areas in Manorville and last month's second search of Heuermann's home in Massapequa Park.
There were a number of necessary investigative steps that were taken. You pointed out just some of them. And, Thursday, you will see the fruits of that investigation.
Right now, it's unclear which Gilgo victim could be the latest linked to Heuermann. The New York City architect is currently charged with killing 4 women whose remains were found along Ocean Parkway more than a decade ago. But the remains of 2 other Gilgo victims, Jessica Taylor and Valerie Mack, were also found in Manorville, the same area that police searched in April.
My clients, again, they're just trying to take it day by day, minute by minute, hour by hour, as the landscape shifts around them.
Vesmitev is the lawyer for Rex Heuermann's 2 adult children. They've yet to return to the Heuermann home after the latest police search, and they're waiting like everyone else to see what Thursday's court appearance will bring.
These are allegations, they're horrible allegations and horrific allegations, and obviously they're dealing with the everyday, process of trying to wrap their heads around the fact that they're allegations against their father, but they're allegations nonetheless.
Now, Rex Heuermann's lawyer did not return our call for comment today, but since his arrest, Heuermann has maintained his innocence, pleading not guilty to the 4 counts of murder against him. And again, he'll be back in court on Thursday, possibly to face a 5th charge.
I wonder if Robert Brown is going to still go with that narrative. Rex says he's innocent when they slap him with this 5th indictment on Thursday. You think he's going to still go with that narrative?
Well, I'm sure he's discussing with his client, how they can approach it. I'm sure he will initially, at some point you don't know if he's going to, finally come to the realization that he's not going anywhere. And then his lawyer will very subtly and quietly ask if there's any deal on the table. At some point, those negotiations happen kind of routinely and all the time, just so they'll know what they're doing, what they're doing with it. But yeah, I think the chief hit on it earlier, and that report kind of confirmed it. Look, I think the Manorville search was April, right? The research of the house was May, and the new indictment comes out in June. The timing of that indicates to me they found something in Manorville, they found something else at the research of the house that matched, and then they went ahead and they indicted. I think we're going to, if we don't learn it, we're going to see some hinting of the fact that something in the outside search and something in the house research matched up, and then they went forward with the new charges.
Absolutely. Chief, I know I kept you guys probably longer than you wanted to be on the show, but at this point, I just want to thank both of you guys, 2 tremendous guests, retired NYPD Chief of Detectives Robert Boyce, and not just a great guest, but a great guy. And I really appreciate you coming on the show. You've been on before, and I really appreciate when you come on. You're a fan favorite, a crowd favorite. And, of course, Bobby Chacon, all the way from the left coast. And I could see it hasn't changed you, though, being on the left coast. You're still
no, I just actually, somebody this morning asked me, hey, were you from New York? And I don't hear my accent anymore, but apparently they hear it. But no, it's always an honor, and to be on with Chief is very, my dad and brother were both detectives, and I grew up with Al Seidman, and in those days, and my dad, got his shield at 6'9" robbery squad first, and used to kid my brother about, he got his shield in narcotics. My brother in Queens Narcotics, and Dad said, you should always. My dad was old school, right? You should have to go to a squad, and you should have to work as a silver shield. Because when my dad first went to the squad, he went as a silver shield, and he earned his gold shield working cases with the detectives, and those were the days. But my brother, went on in 1980 and got it when he was with Queens Narcotics in 1987, I think 88. But yeah, it's always great to be on with you guys.
I was in Queens Narcotics in the late 80s.
Oh, really? Did you know Jerry Pope?
I know Jerry Pope.
Yeah, Jerry was my brother's sergeant. My brother worked for him.
Well, Jerry, I think ended up as a lieutenant. I know Jerry.
Yes, yeah. My brother was
in a while. It's good to hear it.
Yeah.
By the way, Bill, we're all together. Narcotics and the detective squads are all together now. I don't know.
Right.
Yeah, I know.
So
everything changes,
Well, you know what? It worked out real well because no one should be in any place. After a while, you have to keep turning it over.
Yeah.
Something new, and that's how you grow, and that's how you become a great investigator. Is your experiences and those innate skills you bring, but also the experiences that helps.
Yeah,
that helps a lot too. But and Bill, you were Manhattan North. We do a lot on Jerry Giorgio. I don't know if you remember him. The first.
Yes, I remember him.
We're just a tremendous. He had none of those tools, and he solved all of his crimes. So it's along with the great communicator, is a little bit of shoe leather too, which goes a long way.
Well, the murder at the Met was a famous case that they had none of those tools, and they solved that case. Yeah, that was amazing.
It was a great.
I'm going to give you guys final words, and I promise we're going to go. Chief, you want to go first? Your final words.
Real happy with the way they took a lot of our guys out there in the NYPD to the shout out to them, to the DA squad out there. So they've done really well, and they've meshed really well with the Suffolk County detectives. Great to see we're all on one page, and that's the takeaway. A lot of success. And this list thing, it's going to be a thing of the past. There's a new story here that everybody will know. Thank God.
100%. Bobby, your final words.
Yeah, I think the task force is doing a tremendous job. I expected additional murders tied to him. There may be more even after this. They are going through this case meticulously. They've got him now. They can take their time. And I'm sure they have a whiteboard with each victim there, with each piece of evidence they have for that victim. And when they get to that threshold that the prosecutor feels, okay, now we have enough on this person. Now we have enough on that person. They're going through, they're waiting, they're retesting things. They're looking at other stuff. And there may even be more charges after this. And I hope there are. But obviously now I think they have enough to keep him for the rest of his life. But they're going through, they're not stopping. This investigation is not over by a long shot.
Excellent. Guys, again, thank you so much for coming on the show. Folks, I'm Bill Cannon from Police Off the Cuff Real Crime Stories. Until the next time, we'll see you, and God bless.
One episode just ain't enough.